Let's get started then. As Sam mentioned, my name is Azure Dutkiewicz. I am a Microsoft Most Valuable Professional, have been for the past 11 years. Used to be in C#, but as common as it is with Microsoft, they shift things around, rename things. We might know a thing or two about that being devs. So now I'm in the Developer Technologies group. And I've been in tech for over 20 years. I've done help desk, I've done sysadmin, phone admin, the PBX systems, system admin, database administrator, reports developer, desktop developer, web developer, you name it. I've pretty much been in those things. I am not going to make your network cables. I am not going to build your networks. That is not my specialty. I'm more on the software side, more the DevOps side, not so much on the hardware thing. I'm more likely to short them out, so. And then I have a Bachelor of Science in Computer Science and Engineering Technology. Got that back in 2002 from University of Toledo. So make sure to get the piece of paper to say, yeah, I've done this stuff. Tonight, we're going to talk about Azure DevOps, just so you have an idea of what we're going to get ourselves into. We'll talk about what is it, why should developers care, quick intro to source control, look into the Azure DevOps features, SQL Server tools, and more in-depth look at a project. We are at the liberty of the internet connection. If it behaves, I will show you one demo. If it decides not to behave, I have a version on my laptop as well. So, got that all set. All right. Before I get too carried away, how many of you are in a QA role? Okay. How many of you are in a developer role? Do we have any database developers or DBAs? Okay. Did I miss any other roles? Any sysadmins? We have one back there. Server admin. Any project managers? Even if you're developers, how many of you have to manage your own projects? It happened. It happened. So this is going to help us in hopefully managing our project a bit better, managing our overall workflow better. So Azure DevOps, what is this about? In traditional Microsoft fashion, we have a product, we give it a name, and after a while we're like, yeah, we're sick of this name, we want to give it a different name. And then maybe a day or two later, yeah, no, we want to actually change the name and the logo all together. That's how I feel this whole thing evolved. So we use Azure DevOps at work, at our house. But when I started there, so I've been there just over a year and change, we were using Visual Studio Team Services, VSTS. And so I was like, yeah, this is good, I understand this. And then one day Azure DevOps showed up and we're like, wait, they rebranded and didn't tell us. The announcement was like a day later. It's like, why did you do this? Before that, it was Team Foundation Server. So this product has been around for quite a while. And like I said, there's a cloud and a server system, hence why I can do a demo if the internet dies. I have the server running on my laptop. But if the internet's good, we're going to go with the cloud. All right. So a high-level overview. I guess before I get too much further into this too, how many of you are already using Azure DevOps today? Okay, so some of you are, some of you aren't. Good. So this allows us to do continuous integration, continuous delivery using their pipelines. So we're able to write code, check it into source control. Once we check it into source control, it can do things such as pulling the code down, running your code, building your code, making sure it builds properly. It can then run tests. The way we use it at work is we'll push our code into a branch. It'll automatically download the code, run it, run our NUnit tests to see if they work. If the app fails or if the build fails, then the whole build pipeline fails, and we get notifications for that. If they do pass, then we can push them into our development environment or our QA environment. It can either do it on its own, or some of them need our approvals. So there's a lot of automation that we don't need to deploy it ourselves and push a button for things like going to dev. Yeah. So at work, we're using NUnit. I do know it supports NUnit, XUnit. We also do Selenium, but we don't run our automated, the full Selenium tests. We don't run those just because they require a headed browser, not a headless setup. But NUnit seems to work with us what we found is you have to get the unit test adapter and include it in your project. And as in like .NET, NUnit, correct. But I do know it supports XUnit because I've seen it in their documents as well. So. And of course, anything that MS Test or VS Test supports. What's nice is you can take your projects and you can break them up into the various little parts. How many of you are in an Agile environment? Maybe a Scrum environment? Okay, this is going to show you that you can actually break that up into various pieces. And then you can log your work against those pieces. So you could say, I have a task, or I have a feature, or I have a bug. I wrote this code that fixes this bug. And you can they can get linked up together. And that's tracking the work against the manageable chunks. And you can store versions of code using Git. How many of you are using Git today? Okay. So I'm not going to go too in-depth with Git. The benefits for developers is that we can track our work against work items. So we can explain to the client, okay, client, you have this user story. This is what you explained to us. This is how we propose to fix it. This is how we fixed it in our dev environment or in our QA environment. How does this look? So we can show them that based on here are the work items that are written in a language they already understand. But from a management side and from those who care about the code, they can see how those line up. You can do schema comparison. How many of you have to develop for a database environment? Maybe you're creating your database objects. How many of you who do that put your SQL in source control? Yeah, that's what I expected to see. And I can remember going from a DBA role back into a developer role and going, SQL and source control? Who does that? How? Yeah, we do that now. Having this kind of automation makes database changes a lot easier. I'll show you how that works. How many of you do code reviews where you work? Okay. So with the code reviews, you find those beneficial? Working out fairly well? Yeah? So what we like about them is that we have that extra set of eyes. Doesn't always work. We just had something today go into an environment, and they're like, how did this break? I'm like, you guys approved my code review, so it's not just me who broke it this time. But I like having that extra set of eyes so that it could be one of the yes, I wrote the code that prevents the mail from going out. Sorry. So what happens when I say use the network server, but still look at the specified pickup directory. So that happens. Having the code review, being able to go back and see, okay, when did Sarah change this line of code? And that's when they were like, oh yeah, this is what happened. I was like, oh, okay. So then we went back to the PR, figured it out, and then we were able to fix it from there. So having code review and being able to go back to those code reviews, good deal. And again, you can automate your deployment processes. All right, so Git. So why Git? Change tracking, the accountability. Who wrote this code? When did they write this code? Versioning. Some people are using Git. They actually have their releases in their own branches. Some people have different ways of using Git for their versioning, but it is something that can be done. Code review. All right. Since many of you are familiar with this, I'm going to kind of move through this a bit quicker so we have more time to go look at DevOps. So the repository is basically a collection of code. A branch is your line of development, your dev, your master, or whatever other ones, and we'll talk about those. If you hear someone say they're going to clone a repository, that means they're going to make a copy of the code on wherever they're making that. If they're going to pull, that means that they're getting their changes from the server. So I might have some code here, and maybe Larry updated some stuff, and Mark updated some stuff. Now I need to pull their changes into my code. So pull is bring it down here if they've already put it on the server. But if they're making changes, they want me to actually have them. They need to push their stuff out to the server before I can pull it down. And commit is, here's my set of changes. Yes, I really do want to put this in the branch. Asterisk, asterisk, asterisk. Because just because you commit to it doesn't mean that it can't be undone. There's git revert for that. And today we did a revert, and then we did a revert. Fun times. Okay, so this is a sample repository. So, how many of you have heard of the fruit called a pawpaw? It's the Ohio State fruit. Those of you who follow me on Facebook, it's all over your Facebook feed. Not sorry. So it is a state fruit. We don't hear about it a lot here in Northeast Ohio, but down in central to southern Ohio they do. They just had a big festival there. And my husband is actually growing pawpaw trees, so this is now the big side project he's working on. And so I'm like, I have an idea for an app. I have an idea and I can do Azure DevOps with it. Oh. So last night I was like, I'm going to put this together, and he's laughing. He's like, you're doing what? So I created a repository. I have a database that I call All Things Pawpaw. We'll look at this a little bit. I have a data layer. I have an API. I have some models and services, so I broke them up a bit. I have a git ignore file, so I can say, don't commit files that I don't want in there that are gross and don't belong there. I have a YAML file. How many of you are familiar with YAML? Okay, configuration. You will see some YAML. And then I have a README as well, because it happens. Okay, so once you have a repository, then you need to have some way of being able to say, here's my stable code. Maybe this is what you already have in production. Here's features that I'm working on that I might want to show my clients. That could be like a dev branch or some other kind of branch. And then here's features that I'm working on that I need to be able to test myself, but I don't want anybody else to see just yet. That's going to be a feature branch or a branch that it's just for you or for you and a small group of teammates. So in this particular project, I have a few branches. I have a master branch, which is what the default starting branch is. And then I said I wanted a branch off of that, so I took a copy of master at that point and called it dev. And then I've been making more changes off of this in their own branches. All right, so branches, they allow us to store different pieces of code at different points in time. Feature branches, like I said, we call those for the ones that are currently in development, typically running on local machines. Something we found that works for us is, let's say we have a bigger feature that needs multiple devs. We'll create a feature branch with that feature name, and then branch off the feature branch. And eventually then we'll push that into the main feature branch, and the feature branch will go into dev. So we break it down as we need it. Release branches are things that are waiting to go into production. And hotfix branches. How many of you have to do hotfixes? Oh my god, production's on fire. We need to take care of this right now. Did that today too. Hotfixes are there for when things go wrong, be it in production or if they go wrong in QA, then things need to be fixed immediately. So, basic flow, we create our repository, be it on Git, be it in Azure DevOps, be it on your machine, and then it says clone it locally. If you start on your machine, you can actually set up Git to recognize the stuff locally and then push up from there. But typically I start in either GitHub or in DevOps to create the repo and then I clone it down. I can show you what that looks like. Write the code. Add the changes to what we call a change set. When we stage it, staging it is basically saying, like, maybe I have this piece of code here, this piece of code here, and they go together. I'm going to put them in a change set and say, okay, I'm done with this set of code. Now I'm going to commit that change set and then push it into the branch. And there's commit changes. So I really do want to save this and then push the changes. Once I do the push the changes, then any of my teammates can also then pull this down onto their machines locally. And then going forward, whenever you're working after you've already cloned the repository, it's pull your latest changes, make more changes, stage the changes, commit the changes. Usually someone here, it's pull the latest changes, make a branch if you need to, and then make changes in that branch. switch to that branch, then make changes. Now, did I lose anybody with branches? Everybody okay? Anybody a little lost? Looks like everybody's okay. Pizza coma sitting in it. Wake up! Excuse me. With the changes, and then there's push changes. Then there's the pull requests. How many of you are using pull requests at work currently? Okay. It took me forever to, so I've been working with Git now, let's say 6 years, 7 years. It's been a while. But the term pull request I never had an aha moment until recently when I was like, wait, I know exactly what this means now. Somebody wants to pull their changes into this other branch. You want them to pull your changes into the branch. It's a request of pulling the stuff. So you want to bring the code from one branch into another branch. Now, we could say that maybe Derek back there has his branch of stuff he's working on. Rich has his stuff. Frank has his stuff. Okay, so we have different branches, and they all want to put it into dev. Well, we have a policy at work where you cannot commit to dev directly without going through the whole pull request thing. That way, everybody can review it. And so we put in a pull request and say, I have my branch. I want my code to go into dev. So I'll submit a pull request. If you can't push directly to a branch, the pull request is what's needed. What's nice with Azure DevOps, and I'll show you this briefly too, is that it can be set for approvals. So for example, I'm in a team at work, there are about 8 of us. For most of our approvals for our various apps, we need at least 3 people to approve the pull request before it can go through. That way we know that it's the person who created it, they cannot approve their own request. So 3 other people have already looked at that code as well. We can rely on the code to build. So if you have a failed build, your pull request will get rejected. Excuse me. So your code has to build. Code needs to be tested. So if we have unit tests or some kind of tests that are automated that it can run, we require that those tests run like they're supposed to. If they fail, then the PR is not going to go through until you get that fixed. And there are also other gates that you can set. Excuse me. Ooh. Okay. So this is a sample of the pull request requirements that we use. Some things you can see. So this is completely configurable. When I do my demo, I don't have this set up because I've got a team of 1 person. You'll see 2 of my name because I have multiple accounts. But this is, so we have 1 of 3 reviewers approved. Because this isn't met, that particular PI wouldn't go through. The work items. So, excuse me, I mentioned that you have to have, or you can have like tasks and bugs and features, epics, things like that. If you don't have a work item tied to your pull request, again, we usually reject that. People can leave comments on your pull request, that whole code review thing. So if people are like, yeah, Sarah, why do you have a QA connection string in the dev config file? Because I was copying and pasting and forgot to change something. But at least my teammate caught it. They put a comment on the pull request, and now I know I need to revisit that. That happens a lot. The comments on PRs. What's nice too is there are times that like these comments, they're not just a plain old text box. They support rich text. They also support images. So there are times where I'll run one of my teammates' code, especially the front-end team's code, and I'll be like, yeah, this doesn't work, and here's why. And so I'll take pictures, post pictures for them to see as well. So the comments are nice because you can include graphics, you can include formatted text. And then this one required the build to succeed. Something new they added, I'm going to say it was about a month and a half, maybe 2 months ago now, is this coverage status check, where it can do code coverage checking. I use the term loosely, hence the air quotes. It showed up one day. It said that it was optional for Microsoft's definition of, it's optional, but we're actually making it required and not telling you that. So we were not happy when that feature just magically showed up turned on. So It's gotten better, but it's there. It's a feature that showed up recently. All right, some other features of Azure DevOps. So the Azure DevOps menu, typically you're going to see a project, and once you go into that project, it breaks it down into various sections. The overview gives you the ability to see it like a general summary for your project. Maybe you have a README file with what is your project about. Maybe you don't. It's something there. They have a wiki. You can use it to do documentation. How many of you do documentation at work? Yay, there are people who do documentation. I'm not alone. And honestly, every little bit helps. So, wiki is an option. Dashboards are nice too. One of the dashboards I set up recently allows me to see, so we manage, say, like 10 different applications. And I don't know where each application is in terms of deployment. I have a general idea that we push to QA on a day, but like our dev environments, I don't know which release we're at because people are checking in things constantly. A team of 8 of us working on all different things at once, it happens. So the dashboards are nice because I can see where each of those projects are, what releases on dev, what releases in QA, what releases in production. So that helps me to keep track of that. And it also keeps track of, oh yeah, by the way, we're trying to deploy to QA and that failed. And so I'll see that red and I'm like, alright, let me go look at the pipeline, see what broke this time. Oh no, it's broken code, guys, go back and fix it. So it's fun to be able to see that overview on the dashboard and not have to go digging through various menus to find what I need. Questions so far? Okay. This was the overview. Like I said, it includes a wiki. Something else it includes are project stats. So for your project, you can see this one in particular. For the last 7 days, we had 167 work items created. Again, this is over about 10 projects. Over 1,000 work items completed, which is normal for our craziness. We have 87 pull requests that were open and 589 commits. You can see that we still have some issues in our pipelines, but for the most part, the deployments are succeeding and the builds are succeeding. So to have that on the overview helps a bit. In boards, there's a lot of different sections in here. The ones that we use the most are work items. We'll use boards, backlogs, sprints, queries, and estimate. How many of you are estimating the work that you do? Okay. How many of you are using like a planning poker session where you have to do like 1, 3, 5, the Fibonacci numbers to vote? There's an add-in for DevOps that we use that makes that a little bit easier. So you can do estimation sessions right there. So the estimate, that's where that'll come into play. We got pictures. So the work item process, again, I asked about Agile and Scrum, and there's another one in here as well, just so you can see that it supports different workflows. Now, these pictures come from the Microsoft documentation. These are the flows that they support, but you can also, once you get into one, change the flow, change the process a little bit if you need be. So these are not hard set, these are good to start with, and then you can configure as you go. So Agile, they've got epics and features, they've got user stories, you can assign tasks to them, you can assign tasks to bugs, and then you have issues as well. Scrum, similar kind of setup. The difference is now we have product backlog item, and they have impediment here. So change in terminology, change in usage. And then CMMI. I always have to look this one up because I'm like, it's alphabet soup. I know there's letters there, but I can never remember what it stands for. And it's that one process that it's like, okay, you've got epic requirements, and they get tasks, bugs get tasks, and then there's 4 more things down here. And it's like, what? But if you're in a change management setup, this is what this is used for, is change management, risk management, issue management. For the demos I typically either use Scrum or Agile. I have not used CMMI in a demo yet. Make that a goal. Alright, work items. So, work items, what's nice with them is that you can see the list of everything you're working on. And if it's assigned to somebody who it may be assigned to, you can see what status things are in. So this particular image shows, you see the ticket number, you see the ticket title, the icon to indicate what kind of task or feature or there's epic, it's epic, feature, product backlog item, and task. So you see the icons for the different layers. All of my work in this one was unassigned. And then, in this case, everything was new. So this was for a demo I did for a DevOps talk a while back. It was just, we had a lot of new things for this project to get it set up. And so this is what I started with. What's nice too, what I use with this a lot is this filter. Because this filter allows you to search. And when you have thousands of things in your backlog, or even hundreds of things, you're like, what did I do about this? All right, do I have a ticket for broken JavaScript? Yes, I have a few of those. So I find that that's helpful. These filters too. So you can filter by what type of item are they. I only want to see bugs, for example. Part of our thing that we do in the morning is we do our stand-up. Then we estimate some of the work that we have coming in. And then we look at the bugs to see what do we need to fix. So we'll filter using the types. The assigned to, you want to see who's working on what. That tuple there. We also use states a lot. We want to see what's in progress and we want to see what's blocked. Repos. So we talked about repos with the files, commits, pushes, branches. You can use tags and pull requests. They all appear in the repos menu. Commits, they also do the whole get log graph. You've got the SHAs. What's nice too is that there's a triple dot that appears after these. When you click on that, you can actually copy that. So that way, if you need to copy it into the get cherry pick from command line, which is something I do more often than not, I can just copy it from there. Some of the menus that you're going to see throughout DevOps are buried in the 3-dot menus. You can see what is the commit message, who authored it, and when did they do it. And then if there's an outstanding pull request for it, that's what appears in the pull request column. And the sample commit, this is from another presentation I did with Azure DevOps. How many of you are familiar with AdventureWorks? It's a SQL sample. So I did one with the SQL user group showing them how database DevOps works and how you can automate stuff. And used AdventureWorks as the demo. What's nice about a sample commit is you can see what branch did I commit this to? Is this associated with any work items? So I associate to tasks, or to product backlog items, or to bugs. All that information will be right here. If I want to see what files I have in this commit, I can. If I want to compare them to the parent, that's right there. If I only want to see, there are times where I only need to see my CS proj files and packages config files, because if I have another NuGet merge that is a disaster, those are the things I only care about right now. So I will search in here for packages.config and see all the packages configs for the project that I'm in, or the solution that I'm in. One of my solutions has 22 projects, so trying to keep it all straight, it's easier for me to just do the search. But you can see the code as well. We'll take a look here in a minute on what that looks like in DevOps. Pipelines, we will cover that toward the end in the demo, just because it's the builds and the releases that, as developers, this is where our bread and butter lives. This is, I want to build my C# code. I want to build my database code. I want to be able to make sure that it's working properly. I want to make sure my unit tests are running and I didn't accidentally break stuff. My releases are, I want to be able to push it out to an environment so I can either show my other teammates, show the business, or push it to production, for example. Libraries, task groups, deployment groups, we don't really use that much. Deployment groups we use for when we're deploying to different servers in-house. Okay. Builds. So, again, that's compiling the code, building the DAC packs, changing the scripts, and then releases. A DAC pack. So, I'll show that with the database DevOps stuff a little bit more. So what database DevOps does, so we'll talk about SQL Server Data Tools, SSDT. allows us to write our SQL statements. So our create tables, our alters, our constraints, build the stored procedures. You create scripts to load data in, which is something I do commonly, where I will build a table and then I need to preload it. You could do what they call pre-deployment scripts and post-deployment scripts. So I can say, I am going to create this database table. But before I create this database table, I need to run this other script first to turn off some constraint, to pull some data, to change some data, to turn that constraint back on in the post-deploy. So stop the constraint, do some changes, and then in post-deployment, turn those changes, or turn the constraints back on. So backpacks are take all of my database changes and put it in a handy-dandy package that'll get deployed to the database server. This works with SQL Server on like SQL Server 2016, I know we've used it, 2017, 2019. This also works with SQL Azure. So if you have SQL in Azure, SQL Azure, you can build a backpack for that. The trick with building backpacks for SQL Azure is making sure you have the right version selected. So if you're coming from like a SQL Server 2017 or 2019 on-prem in your own data center somewhere, not in Azure, you have to change your database properties on the project to actually point to SQL Azure. Once you do that, then it's all good for moving to Azure. Syntax-wise, our SQL itself doesn't change, but the project file. So database project files are similar to CS project files. A lot of compiling information in there. So what's nice about backpacks is that I can push it out to the server. The server will see what changed and only process the changes. It doesn't rebuild the whole database each and every time. So releases, again, that's where we deploy the code, update our databases with backpacks. Can trigger releases based off of builds, which is nice. Deployment groups. So these are seen with release pipelines. They're used for particularly deploying to a particular set of groups of resources. And what's nice about these is you can use it to deploy to Azure resources that are purely in the cloud and Azure resources that are local via the app services environments. So Azure has the ability to bring some of that stuff in-house. You can use the tools to deploy there as well. Test plans. So we know Azure DevOps has test plans. That's really about all I can tell you is that they have test plans. I haven't actually seen it in action. So if any of you in QA have used this, I would love to learn more about this because I don't know how these work. Because these are different than like your N unit, your X unit. You have your unit tests and your test adapters can run those. DevOps supposedly has some ability. Yeah. Yeah. Okay, so it's a scripting similar to Gherkin then? Step by step? You'll have pass fail. You're going to have to show me more when you start next week. Because I'm looking forward to that. I've heard it's a really awesome tool. We haven't had anybody at work who's actually used it though. We're a bunch of developers who haven't done a lot of QA other than unit tests and Selenium. Not really much in between. So. Artifacts, how many of you have custom NuGet packages? This is where artifacts come into play because then you can put your custom NuGet packages here, and then you can add it to your NuGet config that, hey, look at this feed as well, and then that way you can pull in your own stuff. Now, we have a setup where we say that certain versions of our libraries, so we have libraries that are specifically only in development. They're not ready for production, but we need them in our development environment to actually write code in our other systems. So we have different views. We have one that we call our pre-release. Then we have one that's called the release. And then in our NuGet config, the feeds, we actually specify the view. It's just the feed name @view to figure out which view to look at. So we get into doing that to make it a little bit easier for ourselves. Okay, SQL Server data tools. So the lady who asked about backpacks, this is going to shed a little more light on that. And this is something when we realized how this worked, it was pretty much like, it was earth-shattering for us. We were like, yes, we can actually automate our own database stuff, not have to bug the DBAs. And then they're like, wait, how are you doing this? So now we're teaching them about this, which is fun. So SQL Server data tools, usually when I talk about this, I talk to SQL Server folks, and they're like, why Visual Studio? I'm like, guys, that's what Microsoft's recommending. Even though you're a database professional who's used to SQL Server Management Studio, sometimes you have to come out of there. So Visual Studio is the tool for SQL Server data tools. There's a version for Visual Studio 2019. It's part of the database projects package. It's the data storage and processing workload. If you need it for analysis services, information services, and reporting services, there are extensions for that. In Visual Studio 2017, it is in the data storage and processing workload as well. And again, if you need analysis services, the integration services and the report services, that's a separate download. They had their own tool at that point. Anything older than that, there is an SSDT standalone. I've never used it. This wasn't really talked to with devs a lot. This was more on the database side. It's just now starting to work the dev channels, which is awesome to see. This is why I talk about it, because I'm like, you guys should know about this. So yeah, SSDT standalone is there. Do the Visual Studio stuff. And this I actually have working in DevOps, so I'm going to show you the YAML for that, which will be cool to show. So one of the demos I use is AdventureWorks 2017, because this is something that database professionals can relate to, because they've seen this for years. So you can see what it looks like. Now, as software developers, we're like, hey, there's Solution Explorer. We know what that is. Are you guys working with Team Explorer at all? So if you're using Visual Studio Team Services, Azure DevOps, Team Foundation Services, Team Explorer is what glues your package to their services. Beautiful tool. We may also see the All Things Pawpaw demo. You'll get to see, it's a small one because this is just starting out, but I have a table that I created. I have a post-deployment script, so you guys can see what that looks like. If I create a table and then need to load data, how do I set that up? And you'll see that there's a SQL proj file. Curse of the proj files. It's there for the SQL people too. You can start the database projects from scratch. You can import it from an existing database. You can run it from a script, or you can also import it from DAC packs. So DAC packs, they've been in SQL for quite a while now. I just remember when it came out, and I was at a Microsoft MVP summit, and I could hear the SQL folks in the hallways, DAC pack, DAC pack, DAC pack. And I'm like, what is wrong with them? Why are they all going DAC? What are they saying? And then they're like, DAC pack, DAC pack, DAC pack, backpack, backpack, backpack. And I'm like, what are you getting? DAC pack, backpack? SQL things. Your database is into a nice compressed file of changes. I always tell people, if you're starting with database DevOps and you're not sure where to start with your source of truth. Where is your source of truth? Typically, it's going to be somewhere in production. What does the world know about today? So you might want to start off with production, and then slowly bring in your changes from your dev environments. What's nice is you can build change scripts or migrations to go from prod to dev, dev to prod, whatever you need to do, and just build it in there. You can do schema compares. Schema compares are nice because you can say, I want these changes to come in, and it'll bring it into the project for you. Or it can push it out. A lot of these projects you can deploy directly from Visual Studio. But with Azure DevOps, do you really want to have to worry about deploying, or do you want to automate that? So Schema Compare will help with that too. Now, it's about 7:15. We'll take a break and then we'll get into demos after. But just show you where the tools that I'm using. So the tools I use on my laptop, and the tools I use for demos are things that you can use today. Visual Studio 2019 Community Edition. How many of you know about the Community Edition? Okay. For those of you who don't know about the Community Edition, you can use this at home today. No cost. For single home use, no cost. For small developer teams up to like 5 employees, and then there's some financial stipulations too. there's the bigger the audience of who's working with the tools, more implications. But it is at this point about probably 95% the professional edition, but it is not the enterprise edition. So you don't have like the testing license for the test plans and stuff, and the code coverage metrics I think is something else that you don't have in professional. You have to have enterprise to read like the code coverage files. Yeah, Code Lens is nice. It's slick. Yeah. Yeah. It's amazing where Microsoft has gotten all the tools coming in now. Mm-hmm. Visual Studio Code is nice too because it's cross-platform. So whether you're Windows, Mac, or Linux, you can run it. And I did a demo with a friend. So I have a few friends who are Linux users, and I've been a die-hard Windows girl all my life. And so we go back and forth, but I can use Linux with them as well. And they die laughing. They're like, "You can switch back and forth." I'm like, "Yeah." I'm like, "But you know that Visual Studio stuff?" They're like, "Yeah." I'm like, "It's coming for you." They're like, "No, it's not." And so my one friend, he programs mostly in Ruby and Python, and I'm like, "Okay." I'm like, "James, let's go talk." So we met for coffee, and he's sitting next to me at the coffee shop, and he's like, "So Visual Studio Code, what is this?" And so he installed it, and I showed him. I'm like, "It's just kind of like Sublime or some kind of other editors." I'm like, and then there's LiveShare. He's like, "Wait, what's LiveShare?" LiveShare is like crack. Once you show that, it just spreads. Because it's nice, we can share code. And I told him, I'm like, "You start a session on your machine. Send me the invitation. I'll jump in." And he's laughing. He's like, "Okay." He's sitting next to me watching me. I have full-fledged Visual Studio on my Windows machine. He's got code on his Linux machine. And we're debugging. And he's like, "How did you find this?" I'm like, "Some guy showed me this, and now I just kind of spread the news." And he's laughing because I'm using Visual Studio tools for Python, for Ruby. Those aren't Microsoft languages. I've used it for Java. They're like, "Oh, you went there?" I'm like, "I used to teach Java in a classroom, so yes, I went there." I love Visual Studio. I've been doing Microsoft development a long time, pre-Visual Studio, so when it came on and has grown, I'm really liking it a lot more. Yes, LiveShare is available for Visual Studio 2017, Visual Studio 2019, Visual Studio Code. And just because you have code or you have full Visual Studio, you can talk. It still works. You don't both have to have the same SKU. Yeah. And we could be in a session where I will be looking at code, and you may be looking at something else in the project, and then I can bring your attention to this file and say, "Look at this." Or you could be seeing something interesting and say, "Hey, Sarah, come look at this." And so you flag it down, and then I end up jumping into your file. You might be like, "You know what, I want to show you this file, and then this file, and this file." I can just follow him. I can tell to follow and sit there and watch as he's walking through and explaining stuff. Yes. Exactly. Yep, my friend James, he's all dark theme, and I'm lemon chiffon for my background because too much white background will kill my eyes, but I can't do that dark theme. Just haven't come to the dark side completely yet. But I am running Visual Studio 2019 Community Edition. SQL Server 2017 Developer Edition. Again, it's getting close to professional stuff. And then Azure DevOps. I do have the server. There's a server SKU on here, so I can run it locally. The licensing for that is similar to Visual Studio licensing. It's free for like if you're working at home, open source projects, for example, side projects, that's fine. Azure DevOps in the cloud, I also have demos for. Okay. So it is now 7:20. Let's start back up at 7:30. Give yourself some time, maybe get more pizza, hit the restrooms. If you have questions, I should be around. But 7:30, we'll start back up and we'll look at the demo. But two of the guys have Hawaiian shirts. That's okay. All right. About ready to start back up? Everybody get settled? All right, let's do this. So we're going to take a look at the demos. Let me open up my browser. There it is. Dev.azure.com. So it's marketed as Azure DevOps. It integrates well with all sorts of the Azure services. That said, do you have to use it with just Azure? No. There's an Azure DevOps server. Again, the name is Azure DevOps, but you don't have to necessarily integrate with Azure. Just be aware that it has Azure. Microsoft Azure is the thing that is in their marketing everywhere. It's Azure all the things is what it's come down to. So I went to the MVP Summit this past year in March. Can't talk about a lot of the stuff I've seen. Microsoft says NDAs. But I can tell you that Azure was the thing. Azure was the main sponsor for our conference. I am not in a Azure group. The group I'm in, Developer Technologies, we focus more on the languages and the Visual Studio tooling. So I can focus on Azure, but it's not my main focus. The main focus is languages and applications thereof. That said, doing Azure migrations at work, I'm migrating to Azure, so you're going to see a lot more talk of Azure. Yes. Yeah. So I've seen the pricing, like there's a pricing advisor tool within Azure. It doesn't help me either. And this is where, at that point, thankfully where I am at work, I'm not in a spot to worry about the budget. So I step away and go, you guys want to create the resources? This is what I think we need, but I don't know the financial implications. You guys tell me, does this sound right? So, because the compute and like compute time and the processors, the memory, all that stuff, I'm just like, I will use what you give me and I will make it work for what I have to work with, but I don't know the financial implications of it all. So I refer to the people who know how those work. So that's like my boss. My husband, he works for a managed services provider, so think an IT company for small, medium businesses that don't have their own IT departments. So Azure pricing and stuff is stuff that he does almost every day. And so when I'm like, I don't know how much this costs, I don't know what it's going to cost, I don't know if it makes sense, he walks me through numbers. How he comes up with them, I swear he's a magician at this point. That's one thing, I have to look at the numbers and guess. Now what you're going to see with my demos, so my Azure DevOps account is free. This is something that we all can sign up for. My Visual Studio and my Azure resources, as an MVP, they give us a $150 credit, so that's what I'm working off of. I barely touch that though. That's because I don't use it every day. So. Oh, I have a story about that. That was my first, okay, I don't know what I'm doing with Azure because I deal with stuff on-prem mostly. At home, I have my own server in the house. By the way, I live on the most complicated home network ever, so if you guys are like, yeah, what about this thing? I have a home network. It's an IT playground. We could probably test it and find out. Doesn't everybody have 2 failover clusters at home? Exactly. Or 2 Minecraft servers. Yeah, we are that house. But yeah, so Azure, all the things. The story about, I actually have a story about that because I was just like, okay, 150 credits. I'm never going to use that. That doesn't sound like, it sounds like it's a small amount, but at the same time I don't use the cloud that much. I opened up a VM, disconnected from the VM because I'm in an RDP session. I'll come back to that. I left the server running. And then I got a notification that my $150 credits were gone. I'm like, this wasn't even a full day and it's gone. This is an expensive lesson to learn. Thankfully, at that point, it shut off and I had no demos for user groups. Otherwise, I'd be creating another account and try to work around that. Because I don't use Azure for my day-to-day. I have no reason for me personally to be using it. I use it in my day-to-day at work, but not my day-to-day personally. Now, why do we use it at work? Because the cloud, everything virtually, it makes a little more sense, and it may be more cost-effective in the end. All right. For those of you in the back, how does the font look? Okay. So from this angle, it looked like it was getting a little blurry and broken, so. All right. So what you're seeing here, this is Azure DevOps. Right when I log in, I have an overview of my projects. Now, last night, while I was running through some of my code, I found that Azure DevOps has a demo generator. So you can go in, they have templates for various projects already, so you can see what they do. That's why I was playing around with that. So that's why you see possibilities, or me and my pawpaws. But Azure also had a few other things. I was like, oh, what's this do? So I'm going to show you anything that was generated by the generator is already marked as such. So if you want to play at home, you want to see something that comes preloaded, I recommend this demo generator. I actually have links to it in the slides. I will give the slides to Sam after so he can distribute them. That way you have something to work with. I gotta remember I'm on DevOps, so sliding the arrow back and forth in PowerPoint is not going to make a difference. Alright, so you saw the various menus in the PowerPoint. Let's actually look at what's going on here. I'm going to go back to, where did my mouse go? Where's my mouse? Go back to Chrome. See if I can get my mouse to go back over there. There we go. Go back to possibilities so you guys can see what that's doing. Possibilities. So I have my summary. As you can see, there's not a lot of work done, brand new project. But I'm going to go into my work items. What have I created so far? So I have a dream. I have a dream that one day I will have a website that lists all the various pawpaw events going on in order, eventually by date time, so that the ones that are upcoming, we can see them. The ones that are in the past, those are going to fall down below. That's my vision at this point. But this is what happens when you have dreams at like 9 o'clock the night before the presentation. So, we have a dream, we have vision. It's not fully executed yet, but we want to capture my dream right now. So when I captured my dream, I said, okay, I need to create work items. One moment here. I want to see if I can... Oh, the user story stuff. So I could say I want to create a new work item. This one in particular, I've got it set up so I can do backlog items. The terms themselves are going to vary from Agile to CMMI to Scrum. There are processes that differ between them. So if you use one and not the other, just understand that the creation of these are going to be fairly similar. So I'm going to give it an idea. So I want to create a web service or an API, which I've already done and I forgot to tie stuff to. Create an API for pawpaw events. Now, I'm going to unzoom this a minute so we can get a little more on the screen so you can see what I'm doing. So I have this, create an API. I could create tags. If I need to maybe categorize something, maybe this is something that's needing to go into our hotfix branch, for example. Could tag it for that. Something we usually do is we will say, okay, we have business users, they have feature requests, so we'll take them and we'll put them in here, but then we'll also mark them as needs review or requirements review. That means that the business has a request, but as developers, we need to review that request too. Because if we get something from them, we have questions. And if it's not well documented in here, we will pump back to the business and say, okay, we see you want this, but what is this other screen supposed to look like? What do you expect to get out of this? We will go back and forth with questions. So we'll mark this as needs review so that developers can review it later, for example. I'm going to give a description. Rather than building an MVC site, let's go with an API, a plain HTML site with jQuery. Because I'm a developer, these are the kind of requirements I get. Now, if I'm talking with a business, it's a whole different story altogether. They're going to tell me what they want. Maybe they need some kind of value-added process thing. Whatever it is, we get the details here. You can also say that there are acceptance criteria for this. So I might say something like, given I am visiting the Pawpaw event site, and maybe like when I visit the event listing, then I should see a list of events. So I can put some stuff in the acceptance criteria. I'm going to scroll through. Other things you can see. How high of a priority is this? Now, my demo here is brand new setup. However, you can go into DevOps, there's admin tools and admin menus, and you can actually add better descriptions to it. So we have in our system high, medium, low, and then super critical as well. So we can prioritize these things a lot better. Not just some arbitrary number system. Those numbers have meaning then. Effort. Now, when we're just creating this, I'm going to go ahead and save it. You typically don't put effort on as we're doing that. We'll save that for the estimation session. There are some other features, and this is customizable. One of the newest features they just added in preview mode, coming soon. So I say coming soon because this got turned on yesterday in production for Azure DevOps folks. We can now track which environments, which releases these are in. They have that integration finally built. And it'll appear right on the product backlog item, the bug, the task, whatever item you're working with. As long as you link that to a pull request, that can appear in here. Ooh, bless you. I could add work. I could say that these are related. And my API is probably going to be related to, I'm going to type related. There are various other relationships, so you can say that my work is related, it is a child of, maybe you're reviewing your code and you realize, you know what, David reported this bug here, and now we're finally getting to the backlog, and a week later Sam reported the same bug. Alright, I'm going to mark Sam's as a duplicate of David's. We could do predecessors, so all different types of relationships are right there, which is helpful when you're developing stuff. Related is probably one of the most common ones that we use. And then I can see, okay, what is this related to? What project am I in? Hold on. Yes. So they do have some GitHub integration with it. I haven't used it. Compared to GitHub's tools, no idea. I do know it supports, so on the repos, it supports, you can pull in code from there, you can push to there. I haven't used the integration though, unfortunately. I may have to log a bug with them on this because I went to go and do some related work, and I said to do related, and I'm looking at stuff that's already existing. These bugs are part of this project. In fact, HIPAA compliance for pawpaws? I'm talking about fruit here. Do I really need to have HIPAA compliance? No. Oh, I do. I gotta keep my pawpaws HIPAA compliant. Fair enough. I should probably keep them PCI compliant too, huh? Those are real. Those are coming from a different project. It is a different project. It is not this project, but it is one of mine. we have multiple projects in ours at work as well, and I've yet to see them actually cross. So this is a little concerning to me. So I will be talking with them tomorrow to go, guys, help! We should not see that. Because creating an API for pop-ups, now if I start typing search, event, yeah, for some reason it likes to think I'm in a different one. I know I'm in the pop-ups one, because as I'm looking, I'm like, what area am I in? My area? So this allows me to say that I want to put my tasks. How many of you are web developers? And how many of you have to deal with administrative portals versus what your users are seeing? Common thing. So I actually break them out so that I have everything can start in possibilities, but if it needs to go into an admin portal, I'll put it in the admin area. Just to keep track of, okay, this is specifically for our admin portal. It doesn't need to necessarily worry about the front end side. Sometimes that happens. Especially when we're like, hey, we have this great idea for a new feature, but we need to do a data load first. And we want to see what it looks like in admin first. Okay, fine. So this is how I know which project I'm in, is it's pulling the right areas. But it is most definitely not pulling the right related work. In terms of state, I can go ahead and say that I've approved it, I've committed it. I'm going to say committed just to see what it does. We have something, so how many of you have used Team Foundation Server going way back? Okay, how many of you have heard of TFS Aggregator? So TFS Aggregator allows you to automate some of the processes behind the scenes. Allows you to move things around based on state. Azure DevOps doesn't have that fully in yet. We are begging them for that. And so something we use the TFS Aggregator for is when we mark our product backlog items committed, it'll create tasks for us. That way we can log up against the tasks. Now the reason why we do that is because our backlog item, this is the feature, for lack of a better term. But then our tasks are, we may have a front-end task and we may have a back-end task. And how do we allocate against those? So, because our team is split, we have front-end developers, then we have full-stack developers. Or some of us will pretend to do JavaScript, but we would prefer the back-end. So, all right. So that's creating work items. Let's go look at the work items again. So you'll notice I'm missing a few. Yeah, that ID number isn't even right. It's ID 294. From 809 to 294, I'm going to have to talk with them on that because that really doesn't line up. But we can take a look and see. So I'm going to change my link. So what's nice about this is I could say, okay, what happened to 6? 6 wasn't appearing in there. So 6 was something I already have done. It wasn't showing in there because it was filtered out. The URL is your friend. If you are used to the web URLs and their structures, it's typically the work items, edit or display, and then the ID number. That consistency makes life so much easier. But in this one here, it's already done. Did I log any work against it? I'm going to scroll down and see. I did. So in development, let me, as far up as it'll scroll. So you can see that I logged some work against this card. So I could see that I added a gitignore file as part of setting up the new project, and then I also merged it into my dev. Now, I've been setting up this project, so I have a repository. Let's talk about what kind of code we're looking at here. So my project I called All Things Pawpaw. Is it full screen? Full screen. Okay, it thinks that that's full screen. That's kind of annoying. Okay, so this is my repo. This is my repo. I have a database project. Some things you can see, there's like the events, the post-deployment script. Actually, let's fire up Visual Studio so you can see it. Visual Studio, all things Pawpaw. Okay, fine, remove it from the list. Well, that's not good. Okay, well then. I can fix that. One moment. That is in the code. Possibilities. And all things pop up. There's the solution file. So the joys of Visual Studio. It immediately likes to save to my C drive. I moved it to my D drive, and it said, hey, by the way, I can't find it. That's why I was like, wait, what? No, you should be able to find it just fine. Okay, there's Visual Studio. That way you can see what it looks like in our tools. Okay. How's the text? Do you want it bigger back there? Is it okay? Good? You want it bigger bit? Okay. Let's make it a little bit bigger. That's at 100. How's that? No, I don't know what that is. That's okay though. Alright. I don't know why it keeps saying that this is full screen. So what we have, I'm going to bring my Solution Explorer up. That I don't know that I can actually zoom the font on. Can I zoom it? No, not without going into integration. Alright, so what I have, just so we can open it up, is there's a database project. How do I know it's a database project? If I click on it and press F4 for properties. Okay, let's try this again. No, on my Lenovo Yoga, the function F, or the F4 key is bound to close. I have to remember function. All right, where did my Visual Studio go? Let's bring that back. Where? There we go. Okay. So if I click on all things properties, there we go. You can see that the properties for this, it's a SQL proj file. That is our SQL project. The reason why I say press F4, so I've been doing Microsoft development at least since pre-VB6. That's about as old as I'll admit to. But in the Visual Basic 6 application, I can remember pressing F4 for properties on all the controls. We're now Visual Studio 2019. F4 still brings up that property window. That consistent user experience alone is what keeps me over here. So yeah. So that's, notice that there's a CS proj. I'll show you what the SQL proj looks like. So this one, I cannot edit the project as is. I have to unload it first and then edit it. Edit. So unload the project. So .NET 4.7.2 and below, for the most part, you have to unload the project. .NET Core, the newer stuff, you can edit the project, which is nice, without having to unload it. So like my Paw services, I can right click on that, and there's that edit project file. Excuse me, this demo is .NET Standard libraries right now. .NET Standard works with .NET 4.7.2 and .NET Core. And where we're at work, we're in the process of migrating to .NET Core very slowly. So most of our class libraries and new stuff is .NET Standard, so we can consume them in both the old and the new. There's some. It's changing. Yes. Yeah. Versioning is tough with Microsoft. I said versioning is tough with Microsoft. Honestly, I think we as devs have that problem even with our own code, so I understand the confusion with them. If they would quit reusing names, that would make our lives easier too. Yeah, they are changing the versioning with the paths. Yeah. So this is a .NET Standard CS project file. I didn't have to unload the project, which was nice. But for the database, the SQL project file, you can see, much like your CS project file, it's an XML file. You see things like build scripts, check to make sure that SQL Server Data Tools exists. I can see that I don't need to include certain files. I do need to include certain files. If I am going to run some SQL changes and then run scripts after in the post deploy, I need to make sure that they appear here. This is a common issue that we see where, be it a SQL project file or a CS project file, especially with my front-end guys, they'll push code to the server, they'll create more files, they'll forget to save the CS project file or the SQL project file. They go to run their changes and they're like, well, I know that I put that file there. I'm like, you have to update the CS project file to include that. If you don't update it, it doesn't include it in the build. And they're like, oh. So knowing these files is key for stuff like that. Post deploy is helpful for stuff like that as well. Now, SQL Server Data Tools. I'm going to reload that project. Just like any other project that we've seen for developers in that we can do our own folder structure. Typically, with the SQL data projects, you'll see schema folders, then table folders, and then, or schema folder, table. It follows the folder structure in SQL Server, so it's tables, functions, programmability for stored procedures. It follows that kind of structure typically. This scripts folder, I put it there just as a convention. It doesn't matter if you have it as a scripts folder per se, but I use it because that's where my post-deploy and pre-deploy are. I will typically create a pre-deploy folder when I'm ready for it. In this case, I haven't had a use for it, so I haven't created it yet. I'll show you what that looks like. How many of you are using SQL Server Data Tools today? Anyone? Oh, you have in the past? Awesome. So I'm going to go ahead and add a new folder. I'm going to call this pre-deploy. Something to know about these, so I can right-click, and I'm going to add, I want to add a script. If I need to run SQL ahead of time before it creates stuff, I'll call it a pre-deployment script. So I'm going to say SQL pre-deployment. I usually take the number off. You can only have one post-deployment and one pre-deployment file per SQL database project. So if you have multiple databases and they're in their own projects, you can have a pre-deploy and a post-deploy per project, but only one per project. So you can have multiple in that solution. So then I usually leave this here. I leave the boilerplate in because we have developers who are not used to this yet. They're still coming around to this. It took me a little longer, but now that I like it, it's awesome. This is using the SQL CMD syntax, which is the other reason why I leave this in here is because of the example. Something to note. So I might say something like, I'm going to create a pre-deployment script. I'm going to add a script. And this is, I'm just going to call it, does nothing important. That's equal. Call it like it is. And I'm going to do select at version. Because again, does nothing important, but just so you can see what this looks like in automation. So I'm going to go ahead and save it. My does nothing important is in my same folder. So I'm going to just leave it as :R. Why :R? Because that's what the example says for SQL command. And then the path name we actually use in strings. Does nothing important. .SQL. And then we do go. No, go. There we go. Alright. Red squiggles. How many of you love the red squiggles in Visual Studio? You really love it? Yeah. It's the, hey, this doesn't look right. There, Visual Studio. Let me show you. This is a SQL CMD file. It's thinking that this might be a SQL or a C# file. It doesn't know better. Tell it SQL CMD mode. It's happier. So whenever you're in a pre-deployment or post-deployment script template, you need to push that button to get those red squiggles to settle down. This is the it's the SQL CMD mode button. It is a dialog box with an exclamation point on it. And it says SQL CMD mode for the tooltip. And again, you'll use that with the pre-deployment and post-deployment, just those particular script files. But my T-SQL is just going to be a standard T-SQL file. Just so you can see my load events. So I put them in a load scripts folder. You can organize them however you want. You just need to make sure that you include your paths that way then too. This is relative to where this post-deployment script lives. I'm going to go ahead and tell it this is SQL CMD mode. Those red squiggles drive me crazy. But then, so you can see what that SQL file looks like. It's nothing special. Basically, check to see if there's anything on the events table. If it's empty, toss something in there. This I kept simple. Just so you guys can see this events table. So I have a name that's required, an int identity field. Start, end. I do have a primary key. Hate running into tables without primary keys. That really should have primary keys. It's the DBA in me that gets grumpy about that. Names, emails. So there are other fields. There are just ones required that I really have to put in. Okay. Now, automating your SQL, automating your other deployment, it's going to be fairly similar. Just so you can see how this works, I'm going to go ahead and tell it to build. Much like building like a C# project. Right-click build. And it'll see in here that it loads its references, it does the build, writing the model, the database model. If I can scroll it over, you should see it's got a DLL file, and then it's got that thing called the DAC pack. Now, I'm going to go ahead and check this in. So I'm going to come to my Team Explorer. I use Team Explorer often. We are Azure DevOps at work all the time. So I wanted to see, okay, changes. What have I changed? I also have to point out, if I press function F4, so all things pop out of the SQL project. If I come back to the pre-deployment script, just so you guys can understand where it needs to be set up. So pre-deploy does not need a copy. Just like post-deploy does not need a copy. And the events also are fine. But your tables do need to be marked as build, so that they're part of the build. So if you're doing any pre-deploy, post-deploy scripts, they don't usually need to be included in the build. But if you're building new objects, stored procedures, functions, tables, users, permissions, things like that, whatever you're building, make sure you mark them as build. Alright, so I'm going to go ahead and go back to my Team Explorer and check this stuff into Git. And I'm just going to right-click and stage it. I'm going to commit it. More SQL fun. And yes, I put it on display events. I'll go ahead and sync it and tell it to push. So this is going to push to Azure DevOps in the cloud. Alright, I'm going to flip back to Azure DevOps in the cloud. Maybe. There we go. It's really annoying why it's doing that. You're going to let me drag this? Sheet? Maybe? Okay. Can everybody see where it goes to clone? Okay. Just have to manually, don't maximize it. Alright, so I'm going to see here that I updated dev display events 20 hours ago. I haven't refreshed the page. If I refresh the page, you'll see that it said, hey, you just updated this. I love this feature at work because when I'm flipping between repos, I'm like, what branch was I on? Oh, look, it just told me which one I just updated. So then I can say, okay, let's create a pull request from what I just updated. Now, what branch do I want to go into? Well, the way I do my feature branches, They usually do dev dot and then some kind of name. At work, we do dev dot and then our task ID or our parent ID, just so that we can track it better. So I'm going to say display events. Now, I don't want one person shop for this. I don't technically need to do this. It's overkill, but just so you have an idea of how this works. I could put code in here. I could mark down it, as you can see. Something we do at work is we have Cosmos DB into play, and we write our own migrations. So I might label something as, hey, by the way, I have a Cosmos migration in this PR, so that when I go to release it in production, I know to run that migration. So I use tags for stuff like that. I'm going to add myself as a reviewer. Oh yeah, that's kind of disturbing that I can see the hotel team in this list too. That's a different project. So yes, my hotel team can approve my pawpaw stuff. Not touching it. And then I can see what exactly are in my changes. I have all sorts of files that I'm changing, including the does nothing important SQL file. How many of you use Dapper? So microRM, yeah. So I've got that in here as well. A bunch of files. So I'm going to go ahead and tell it, create the pull request in dev. Now, because I've created the pull request, now I can get this stuff into dev, but I need to make sure, do I have a work item linked? I do, so that's okay. Are all the comments resolved? Well, for now they are. But I could be like, did you really mean to do this does nothing SQL? Which happens. We have the do you really mean to do this? Then I could say something like, you know what, I'm not going to fix this. Or this won't fix. Or you can be like, oh yeah, you know what, I didn't mean to do that. I was saying that one a lot today too. We had merges that went bad, and so stuff was getting undone, so I had to redo it. Or you can mark it resolved, or you can say pending. But yeah, this gives you a way to leave comments on it. And as I leave comments, you can see, uh-oh, not all the comments are resolved. So then I'll come back here and be like, okay, fine, I'm not going to fix it. And now that's considered a resolution. Yep, that's where I'm headed next. So this is the overview of the PR. This is the files. So I could actually just mark stuff in here too. So I could come to the file. I could come onto the line itself and say, at version. Why? So I can make comments on the lines of code. Let me zoom it down a minute so I can see the comment button. So I can comment there. I could do stuff in the middle of it and say, okay, like, was this intentional? Did I really mean to add that group? Comment. Notice you see things side by side. So I'm actually adding things. This was already checked in. I'm adding more code to it, so I can see it. I meant to do that. What's nice too is if I come over into my overview, I can see that, oh, there are comments on this file. So I don't have to go to the files view to dig for comments. They appear right here. And I can say, yeah, this was intentional. Yep. Apply and resolve. Now something I've noticed for apply and resolve, sometimes it works just fine. Sometimes you click reply and resolve and it just, the reply and it forgets the resolve. Lately it's been doing that. And then I'll say better than identity, which is another issue we had today. So then I say, okay, all my comments are resolved, work items are linked, let's go ahead and approve it. I'm going to go ahead and complete it. You can set rules to automatically complete things so that you have your reviewers approve it and then it goes into completion. If you want to go ahead and squash, let's go ahead and complete. So I can complete the merge. Now I've done a lot of my work in my dev and I'm ready to actually push this in a state for people to see. So if I go ahead and do another pull request, notice it's not telling me that there are any for me to create, so I'm just going to do it from here. I can say, okay, I'm ready to go dev into master. Dev to master for demo. You can see all of the work items that have been committed to dev, which is nice to see what work is there. You can see the files, you can see the commits. So if you're looking at this and you're like, wait a minute, does this stuff need to be here? I can go ahead and copy that SHA, so I can then say, let's revert it, if I really don't need it there. Go ahead and create. Same thing here. I can say, this is required, this isn't required. We do this on a branch by branch basis. So for our hotfix, for example, we have 2 approvals, but for main production, we do 3 approvals. The reason why we don't do 3 on hotfix is usually it's an emergency, and those who need to take care of it are there. We never let the hotfix be on one person. What's nice too, so that's checking in code. This rocket ship, this is where the builds and releases live. I have the build set up. We'll go back in Visual Studio so you can see the YAML file. So, if you've been using TFS and Visual Studio Team Services, VSTS, you may be familiar with the classic way of creating builds, which is dragging in tasks and saying, do this, then do this, then do this, then do this. One day, the YAML showed up. Yeah, this gentleman's reaction is just shaking his head no. Yeah, we were yelling at our screens at work that day. We're like, YAML, why? Where are my classics? And I'm like, guys, look at the link down there. Oh, they put a link at the bottom of the classic. I'm like, guys, this is a Microsoft product. This is where they hide things. Check the bottom. So they were using that for a while, but now we're moving everything into YAML. Because when you do it in the UI, it was okay for a drag and drop and seeing that. But YAML is yet another, well, and I've seen yet another markup language, and YAML ain't markup language. And I'm like, what? Why? You see it mostly in configuration files. I actually have to go outside the solution for it. So let me go up a bit. So it's outside of my solution, but I created it in the browser. It makes more sense to see it in here. So basically, this allows us to say, when I create a build, I want it to do stuff. What this is saying is that I am going to name the thing that comes out, is going to have a year, month, day, revision, dash, and then whatever the branch name is the file it's going to create for us. This is to make it easier for versioning. The trigger, so anytime I commit to master or to dev, I want this build to run. It doesn't mean I can't run it from my feature branches, it's just I don't want it to automatically run from my feature branches. When I push to dev, I want that to run. When I push to master, I want that to run. Pool. So pool, I always have to go back to the docs for. Because if you use the starter pipeline, they actually have it set to a Ubuntu box, which is a Linux box. But because I'm working with SQL Server Data Tools, I need to use a Windows box. So whatever you're using for your tooling will determine what VM image you're using. Again, this I need to go back to the Microsoft documents for that value, because I may need something else, and I don't know what it is. In the Windows latest, they are using Visual Studio 2019 for their pools. Yeah. So the pool is what's running your build. Well, technically it's an agent, but so you have multiple agents. The best way to describe it, it's the thing that does the build, it's the thing that's going to follow the steps we're about to outline here. So you're going to tell the agents in that pool to do things. Now, because I'm dealing SQL Server Data Tools, I need Windows machines to be running all the tools. Linux isn't fully supported. So I'm like, okay, Windows latest, I know from looking at the documentation that it's going to use Visual Studio 2019 and Windows 2019 to do the build. If I have stuff specifically for Visual Studio 2017, which was the previous version, you can specify that here. If you want a Linux box, you can specify different versions of Linux as well. That's where the documentation comes into play. This part is actually fairly well documented. Azure documentation is hit or miss. If you're dealing with stuff in developer, like front end, like ASP.NET, love their documentation. Azure Web Jobs, if you follow me on Twitter, you know that that's been a fun adventure. And not that real fun, but fun. So yeah, documentation's hit or miss. But this one is really good. Variables, these are things I can use later on down in my pipeline. Again, this code, this YAML configuration, is so that when I push my code out to dev or to master, this is the build that's running. Now, prior to this file, I had no way of building my solution in Azure DevOps. Once I checked this into my branch, then I had a way to build on Azure DevOps. So this is specifically for building. Now, things have gotten more complicated. I'm just keeping it simple for the demo, but you can do multi-branches, multi-steps, more configuration. So I use NuGet because I have NuGet packages in my other libraries. So I need to do the NuGet tool installer to install the NuGet tool. I need to go ahead and tell it to do a NuGet restore. I need to tell it to build my solution. Double asterisk will go ahead and go into the recursion. So it's going to check if you have a top level folder, if it'll go all the way down to find the solution. Yeah. I haven't figured out what that really means. Yeah. Is it the version of the task? Okay. Because I've seen it with some and I'm just like, I think it's the version, but I missed the classic view where the versions drop down. It made more sense. Display name is what you see when you run it in the build. This is to remind you which step you're on. The inputs, the parameters you're passing into whatever task you're working on. Play on build try just caught my attention. Should be true. Oops. Oh well. Alright. That part's not even built yet, so I'm not going to panic. Yes, Sam? Much more? Okay. About 5 more minutes? Alright, remind me at 5. Okay. Sam will cut me off. I'll bring the shepherd's hook. We're used to this. See when I go back. But then I'm going to put this in a folder. The reason why I publish it to a folder for websites, then I move my databases into their own folder and publish them in databases, so that I have what we call the artifacts for websites and databases in their own spot, so that when I go to deploy them, I have my database steps. I say, just give me the database artifacts and then deploy them. We had this conversation today at work. I was so excited about this because they're like, so Azure has the ability you can deploy things to slots and then test it in the staging environment and then swap the slot. Well, when we swap the slot, we don't really need to re-download all the artifacts. They were complaining today. They're like, why do we do this? I'm like, I don't know why you guys do this. And they're like, why do you say it that way? I'm like, because I don't do that on mine. I'm like, let me show you. You go down here, and you uncheck it, and they're like, I'm like, you gotta ask. You ask, I'll tell you these things. So that's why I published the build artifact. Now, I'm fine with it having that try in there for now. I'm going to go ahead and close Visual Studio so we can go into the build pipeline, the release pipeline. So, actually go back to the build so you guys can see that it ran. Builds. So, when I pushed to dev, this one was fine. When I pushed to dev again, this one was not. This is okay. This is because, one, NuGet restore is failing, which I expect because I started working on the API stuff last night. And so I expect it to be broken. In the build the solution, you can see that the display names I use, this is where they appear. Now what I was talking about, if I come into releases, you can see I actually released something to dev. Edit a release. So this is pushing to an environment. So in a release, first thing you gotta do is tell it what repo. This tells it then what artifacts it can use. In this case right now, the only artifact that it knows about from the last successful build is the database artifact. So if I come in here, so you can see, I can tell it the latest version. And then if I come into the dev, so I can create various stages. dev, QA, and production are my most common ones. We have other lower environments for some of our other projects, so we have a lot more stages. And then we keep our stages for swapping slots as a separate one, so that we have approval, so we're very conscious as to, okay, do you really want to swap the slot? Do you really want to put this in production? That one last check. So we have it as a separate step for that approval. But then what I can come in here is I could say, okay, my agent job. So the agent, this is who's going to be doing this deploy. Am I deploying to a Windows machine? That's fine. If this were something that could be run on Linux, then I go ahead and say run it. They even have Mac OS. This is not the Microsoft I grew up with, but I like this new one. I'm actually playing with all the other people. The Azure agent pool. So you can have only so many builds going on at a time. You have to pay for more agents, more things to run the builds, more things to do the deploys. We also have, this is Azure Pipelines, which means that it's running its thing. Where I work, we have our own pipelines where we have our own agents on our own machines, especially since we have stuff that's internal. So we deal with that. To deploy to a database, you tell it what your Azure subscription is, and I can tell it the authentication type. And then I have stuff, yes, the password's in plain text, it's about to get deleted again, so I'm not too worried, but just so you can see. Now I could do things where I could say variables, and I'm going to add a password, or a variable, and I'm just going to call this deployment password. And I'm going to say that the value is password 123 exclamation. Super secret password is super secret. Want to see how super secret it is? Oh, you can't see it anymore. Honestly, it's one of those, it's like you can do things like that, and then I'm going to go ahead into my tasks again, and I'll come over to here and change this to my deployment password. This is how you refer to the variable. So I can do this, and typically you can do that, or you just use Azure Key Vault, some kind of secure way of storing your password. But this goes back to the question about the DAC pack. So I come in here, I tell it I want to do a DAC pack. You can tell it if you want to do just a script, you can. If you want to write your SQL right there too, you can. I use the DAC pack because I'm like, you do your thing, figure the changes. And then for each of the steps, you can say things like, this is fine, or if it failed, it's okay, keep moving, or if it's failed, no, just stop. So you can do things like that as well. I'll go ahead and save this. Password and variable. Just so you can see what a deployment log looked like that was successful. I'm going to go back to my releases and go into dev. And you can see as I click on deploy all things that what this is going to do, or what it did, is it ends up taking that DAC pack. It says, hey, I have your DAC pack, and I'm going to run it against your database. And then you can see that it started it, it completed it for the initializing. It analyzed the deployment plan. What's in this DAC pack? What's on the server? Where are they different? In terms of schema, usually, and whatever else you may have. We exclude the users, the roles, logins, specifically to keep that stuff out of our code. I know some people use it. You can see that I created the events table, and so this stuff was all handled through automation. You can do the same thing with code. We use it to deploy to Azure App Services in the cloud, and also the Azure App Service environment and the paths, the stuff internal as well. Okay. Go through the last of the slides, Sam. I'm going to just breeze through them for you. Okay, so final words of advice. Build often. If you've got multiple people on the project, when you're dealing with databases, schema compare often. When you're dealing with code, pull often. If you are working in a feature branch and you find that your developer branch has been updated, make sure you merge your dev back in so that you're working with updated code. Because the last thing you want to do is work on a project, maybe it carries on for some weeks, and then you go to merge it in and you have these merge conflicts that you could have resolved earlier on. The schema compare, I did not because we're short on time, unfortunately. You can generate scripts in SQL Server, and then the Visual Studio Code, the C# stuff, I will have as an after note for Sam to pass on to you guys as well, since we ran out of time. Azure DevOps, they are on YouTube. Wonderful videos for people just getting in and trying to figure it out and learning who's who in the community. There are documentations there. The DevOps demo generator that I was playing with last night, I made sure to include that link there as well. For those wanting to deal with SQL Server, these are the links for that. And then for those just getting into Git, that's a common question I get is, I'm new to Git, where can I learn more? There are various tutorials out there. These are the few that I found that have been super helpful for even the brand new beginner. Because I know Git can be confusing and it can be a headache. All right, any questions? If you need to ask me anything afterwards, outside of here, I am going to Sliman's afterwards, even if Sam isn't. We'll still have fun without you, man. We'll have a corned beef sandwich for you. And a beer. But I am on Twitter as Saduki. On LinkedIn, linkedin.com/in/Saduki. My email is sarah@cleatechconsulting.com. Cleveland Tech Consulting is a company I've owned since 2011. I keep it for my side gigs.